Welcome to an episode of Q&A with Che. I'm Che. Today I'm excited to have on the program the founder of STEM, Milana. She's amazing. She is brilliant. She's going to break down what STEM is, why you need it if you're an artist, a producer, a songwriter, a manager. I'm so excited about today's episode. She's going to break down what it means to be a female founder of a startup. She's going to break down just the trials and tribulations of an entrepreneur. She's going to break down her journey. This is an amazing episode. Please tune in. Please be sure to subscribe to Q&A with Che on the Himalaya app or wherever you get your podcast. Welcome to another episode of Q&A with Che, and I'm your host, Che Pope, the one and only. No, I'm kidding. Today, I'm very proud of this particular episode. It's truly a friend and a truly just a brilliant human being who's given me so much information on my journey in terms of building a startup and building a company that I'm so honored to have her on today. Milana, how are you?
I am so honored to be here.
This is Milana, the founder of STEM. That's just an amazing accomplishment. I hope you realize that.
Today's a crazy day. In a good way. We made a huge announcement and the response has been incredible. And it's one of those moments that you really want to bottle up because the whole journey of entrepreneurship, people say it's a roller coaster, but it's like, that's an understatement. It is a wild ride and it is so painful. But it's days like this where you get to bring something into the world and see how people react. And then you get a pinch me moment because you're sitting across the table from someone that you admire so deeply, like yourself, Che.
Thank you.
And the fact that you just introduced me that way to me is unbelievable.
Well, I'm truly honored to know you. You know, I appreciate
Feeling is
that.
mutual.
Yeah. Let's backtrack a little bit, just because this, some of the purpose of this podcast is really to inform and, really give insight to young people trying to find their way, young people trying to figure it out. Let's backtrack. For those that don't know what STEM is, what's STEM?
We are an online platform that is really focused on bringing the best in class financial tools to artists and creators. And the way we got into the market was we built an online website and application that made it super easy for independent musicians to self-distribute their music onto Apple, Spotify, all these platforms. The thing that we did uniquely that no one else was doing this in 2015 was that we automate the splits. So as you know very well, every song is made in collaboration, whether it's with songwriters, producers, other featured artists. Sometimes you're sampling music, you need to pay out on the master. Unfortunately, in 2015, you had two options. You could either sign with a major label and have them handle all of that for you.
Which is very difficult.
Or you could put it up for free and not monetize it on platforms like SoundCloud and YouTube. And that's the kind of stuff we saw people like Chance the Rapper doing with his mixtapes or Childish Gambino. And when I was, prior to founding STEM, I was an agent at UTA. And I thought to myself, well, that's kind of bullshit, right? In a world where you have applications like Venmo or PayPal and you can send money over the internet in seconds, why can't you build an app that does that? That just pays everyone at the same time, that knows who gets a piece of what and automates the payouts.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've always sort of questioned, that in terms of the music business hasn't moved forward with technology, right? It's so sort of still behind. It's still the traditional music business that was created in the 50s. Or even before that. Okay, so you're an agent at UTA. You have this idea. What made you think that? What gave you the confidence? Whether it's confidence, delusion, because I don't know, because sometimes I feel delusional trying to create this startup. What gave you the just the confidence to just go for it?
Yeah, it took a while. I had this idea. So my story's a little bit crazy. I got hired at UTA in a role that put me as the first digital media agent in Hollywood. I was 21 years old.
As the digital media agent.
Yeah, and everyone's like, what the fuck does that mean?
Yeah. What did you major in college?
So this goes back even further. I started at Michigan State because I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit, and my parents were Russian, and they're like, you could be a doctor or a lawyer, pick one. And I wanted to be a movie producer at the time. Like I wanted to go into storytelling. And so I went down the path of going to Michigan State for a year. I survived, and I studied pre-law thinking that that was the thing I could do because I love telling stories, and that's what lawyers do.
Yeah.
And ultimately, after my freshman year, I was like, I can't do this. I really want to make it to Hollywood. So I convinced my parents to let me go to UCLA for film school, but for the summer. Because to them, it's like, oh, it's extracurricular activity. It's fine. You need those credits anyways. Just do what you love. And I did that for the summer program. What I didn't tell my parents I was doing was actually planning to stay out there forever. And I knew that if I was in LA for the summer, I could find a job. I could convince my parents to let me stay, and I could ultimately transfer to UCLA. And so I did that through the film program. But because I was paying out-of-state tuition and I didn't come from a family that could help support me with the move, which is why I had to work, I ended up having to drop out before my senior year.
Yeah. Still pretty brilliant, though, with strategy.
But I had to drop out because I couldn't afford to go back to college. Yeah. I was having to take out loans for $100,000 to pay for out-of-state tuition and living costs. And I got denied. I mean, this is 2008, 2009 when the economy crashed.
Yeah.
And instead, I went to Endeavor and started in the mailroom and started working to learn what it was like. Because I knew that if you want to work in Hollywood, you got to be an agent assistant. You got to work your way up. That's the best place to learn everything about it. So I did that. And that's when like the writer's strike happened and the merger with William Morris and all this stuff happened. And I realized myself, I became less obsessed with making long form movies and TV shows and more obsessed with all of this new emerging content and talent that we saw coming out of YouTube and Instagram. And back then, like TikTok didn't exist.
Yeah, but
Instagram just started, but like none of that existed, but there was all this new storytelling. And I left the agency and realized like maybe there was something I missed in my senior year of college that like would help me connect the dots of all the things I'm changing and seeing.
Yeah.
And so I went back to school, but I didn't graduate in the film program because I felt like I had learned so much spending a year and a half at the talent agency that instead I made up my own major and I called it Critical New Media Studies because I wanted to study the audience and not the way of producing things.
Wow. Yeah, just to have that recognition. And I guess that's from, getting that real life experience.
Yeah, there's nothing better than that.
Okay. So you go UTA. You've got this basically new position that, that didn't exist. You get the idea for STEM.
Mm-hmm.
Then you decide, okay, I'm going to do this business. What was your step one in terms of really like starting the company?
Yeah. So I never knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. That was like not something that I felt compelled to do. But this problem kept haunting me. And I think you and I talked about this where like entrepreneurship is almost like a disease because you have to be crazy to go through this. Like it is self-inflicting pain left and right. And the only reason you can bear through it is because you have this vision or this idea. And I think this is something that a lot of artists can relate to too, like this burning desire to tell a story that they see.
Yeah, and they have this music in them that has to.
It has to come out. So I think entrepreneurs and creators are the same breed of human, right?
Yeah.
Like
we're
wired differently. I didn't know.
Dropped as babies or something. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. But like I didn't have the confidence to go and do it until I could learn all the things I needed to learn. And in my job, I got the amazing opportunity to watch new businesses being built and formed. So in the digital group, we did everything from like day one, teaching the agents how to download apps on their iPads, to then day two was like, how do we get our talent to tweet and be on social media because they need to promote their movies and films? How do we teach them not to tweet stupid shit was like the second part of it. And then it was like, who are all of these amazing creators that are merging? And one of the clients I had the benefit of working with really early on was Issa Rae, who started on YouTube, had her YouTube channel, Awkward Black Girl, where she was making her own video content. Coming out around the same time as Lena Dunham had Girls on HBO. And this was like the response to that in a completely different way. And we saw an opportunity with the talent division at UTA to sign her and say, how can we transfer this amazing format and this amazing talent as a producer, because she was a screenwriter and a director and did the whole thing herself, and give her a bigger platform and transition it to major TV. So I got to work with things like that. But the last buck of it all was we built a couple of companies. So we incubated Awesomeness TV, and we started being the place that a lot of tech companies came first. And so I got to witness other companies raising money. And that's when I learned what it was like to put together a pitch deck. How do you raise seed capital? Who are the investors? And started building this network over my 5 years of being at UTA that when the concept of STEM became super clear to me, I felt like I had the tools and had the training to take the steps I needed to take. And I had been sort of sharing this idea and socializing it with early stage investors, people like Gary Vaynerchuk, Scooter Braun, Shervin Pishavar, and they all were like, whenever you're ready to be an entrepreneur, just do it. Like, we'll back you, because early stage seed entrepreneurs aren't investing in the concept, they're investing in the person.
Yeah.
And for godforsaken reason, I have no idea why they thought that I was capable of being an entrepreneur, but it was them that gave me the confidence, because they're like, whatever you do, we're just going to back it.
Wow, that's great. I mean, that's having that vision, though. You had that vision and the passion. I think that's, what's been responsive to me, because same thing. I don't have a background. I have, background in making music. I have the background of running a, big, starting a company and so forth. I feel like there's the traditional music business, and now I feel like companies like yourself are coming as disruptors to some extent. How are you received by traditional music business? Were the labels receptive to you?
It's a good question. So we're not looking to disrupt the major labels, right? The majority of the clients that we work with actually on STEM are independent labels, right? And I personally believe that there's a really important role that major labels play. And I think that there's different kinds of artists, just like there's different kinds of entrepreneurs, right? Yep. There's entrepreneurs who are really great at bootstrapping their business. There are artists who want to be homegrown and know how to get themselves out there on their own. And then there's artists who want more development, who want more resources, who want to go somewhere where there's someone who has the ability to take a kernel of a raw vision and help shape it into something bigger. Like, that's where I think you've established your career and your brand, is that you're one of those people who know how to take something that's raw and make it something that's bigger, that translates.
No, I try.
Exactly. So I believe that, with that said, major labels are incredibly important. Where I personally see a lot of opportunity for change, and the change in the world that I want STEM to drive, is more clarity. And what that means to me is I want to make artists understand the value of their content, so that when they have an opportunity to determine the options of whether they sign with a major label, or they go to another distributor, or they work with individuals like yourself who are starting your own shops and creating more creative incubators, they understand, first of all, what they're worth. And second of all, have a framework to think about, what do they need. And so...
That's just so well said.
Thank you.
I mean, yeah.
Because you don't want to have to pay more for what you need. You don't have to pay more if you don't have to, right? Get really clear on what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. Just signing to a major label because they have a huge brand is a terrible idea. Know what that label's good at. Is it marketing? Is it A&R? Is it global reach? And go to the home that's really great at doing that, because you can go to the wrong place and now you're giving a much bigger percentage than what you should.
Yeah, and you're at the wrong place. And I think it's, one of the things I encounter with artists all the time is I feel like they don't know their worth. They don't know their value. So that is an excellent answer in regards to that, because to me, that's one of the biggest things that I try to instill in artists, is really learn, your value, understand what IP means, so that when you do business, you're not undercutting yourself. You're not selling yourself short, because I feel like artists do that all the time.
Totally. And I think a lot of managers, try to support artists. And what we're seeing is that managers are stepping up and providing a lot of the resources that back in the day, the labels would. And so if you're an artist and you have a manager who's really great at any of these services, marketing, A&R, promotion, strategy, like that's great, but figure out what's missing and then go and find the home or the person or the services company that can fill that. And then think to yourself, well, how much, if I were to hire these people full time, how much would I be spending, right?
Yep.
And then look at the economics and say, okay, here's what I'm making. Over the next X amount of years, how much would it cost me to do this on my own if I were to bring these people together independently? Because today you can, right? Like the major labels hire the exact same A&Rs and independent radio promo people or marketing people that you could if you had money.
Yes. That fascinates me too, that, labels will have a marketing department, but still hire an outside marketing department.
Because services don't scale.
Yeah.
It's hard.
It is. So that leads me into my next question. Okay, now you get STEM, you get it up and running. What do you feel like from when you started it to now? What has been the STEM journey? What did you feel like, what did you feel like you had right, and what did you feel like you had to make some changes or make a turn or turn left? And
oh my God, we took so many detours, and we're going to continue taking detours, right? Like it's never a linear path, ever. And I think the media does a really poor job at portraying that and setting like false expectations for what it's like. Because you have these stories of these unicorn companies that emerge and 3 years later worth billions of dollars. And you're like, oh, it went like from point A to point B really quickly.
And it's like a lottery ticket.
Yeah, but it never looks that way. What I'm appreciating is that more and more entrepreneurs are peeling back the curtain and talking about the stuff that was happening in the background. Early on, our vision was, how do we create the financial backbone of the business to eliminate the friction of people getting paid, right? Like that's always been a big part of what we want to do. Making artists financially literate is incredibly important as a piece of that. But at the end of the day, we want people to get paid and not have the tension of collaborating, right? Eliminating all that friction. And so how do we get there? Initially, we thought we could do that by layering on top of existing distribution businesses, whether it was labels or third-party distributors like TuneCore and CD Baby and others. And in reality, what we realized is that we couldn't. And so we had to become a distributor ourselves.
Oh, okay. That's a big...
And that was a huge commitment that we didn't realize at the time. And it was one of those decisions that really was a fork in the road that I don't know what would have happened if we would have tried to go the other way. There were a lot of like compliance regulations around becoming a payments company that we thought at the time was more expensive. And we learned that actually distribution was a lot more expensive. And so that was one of the big shifts and big investments that we made. And being a distributor is really hard.
Yeah.
I think the notion of people assuming that like it's easy because it's digital, you press a button and it publishes is not actually how it works in music distribution, because there's hundreds of platforms and they all have their quirky ways of receiving content, and artists in this world want to put up things really last minute and remember that last minute they want to change out the artwork, or they forgot to put up, to input the metadata around the featured artist correctly. There's all these little things that make the process more complicated. Mm-hmm. So I think that what scares me is how commoditized distribution appears to be when it's truly so expensive to do. And so we started there, and that actually defocused us away from being able to expand on the functionality that we wanted to build around making payment splitting more seamless. And
so you feel like that deviated from your path a little bit?
It totally did, because our mission was to empower all creators, right? And you can't do distribution at scale for all creators when you're a small startup with a small team. And we grew really quickly. And I think the hardest thing for us was to acknowledge that artists are not all the same, and artists at different stages of their careers have very different needs. And the way that I was thinking about the problem was really related to artists who have sophisticated management teams behind them, who are collaborating a lot with established songwriters and producers who have already proven concept a bit and are further in their careers. And the things that are important to them are very different than the artist who's in their bedroom making music by themselves.
Just starting out.
Yeah, so us having to change the way we thought about the product was really difficult when we were trying to serve everyone. And I think the hardest decision of our business was made this past year with having to clearly define who we were able to service, and unfortunately part ways with a large percentage of our user base when we announced STEM Direct.
Okay. Do you feel that was the necessary direction you had to take to?
We would never have been able to get past distribution or make a big difference in the business if we would have stayed in that space and been sort of this like competitor to a TuneCore, DistroKid, or an AWOL. That is not what we wanted to be. And we were sort of stuck in the space because we were trying to do too much at once.
That makes sense. So now back to the core business. So now we have STEM Direct, you announced.
We've had STEM Direct. Today we announced STEM Scale, or Scale by STEM, which is...
tell me about that.
It's a new product. This is the thing that I've been like obsessed with. This is the place I wanted to get to.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So we felt like when artists were growing, they needed money. And when they looked at the options, it was, again, major label, taking an advance from a distributor, or going to some of these online royalty share type businesses where you can sell a piece of your earnings in return. And while there were great options, what we felt like was missing was that none of them clearly told the artist how much they'd have to pay back, how long it would take, or give them the opportunity to choose their terms that suited their business, right? Major labels love throwing high numbers at artists and high sticker values because artists want to take, some of them want the biggest advance, but then they end up giving so much away.
Yeah, exactly. The biggest advance comes with the biggest terms.
Totally. And when you look at it, not from like the perspective of the music business, but you look at it from the perspective of the banking or the loan business, it's a predatory loan, right? You're paying back on a 15%, 85%
hard money loan. Yeah, it's like a hard money loan.
It's beyond that, right? Hard money loans have an interest rate or rate of return that's like, legally, they define it anything north of 35%. But a major label advance that's like a 15 points on a master, you're recouping out of that 15%. So it starts as a loan that's like a 566% interest rate, which is like so illegal by usury law. But, it sounds really bad. But the truth is that it's because you're paying for the overhead of the whole entire team and all of the expenses of that team at that label to service you, whether or not you're using it. And that's just how they price it.
Exactly. And that's always been the difficult thing for me, for instance, when I worked with Kanye and Good Music. So for instance, you're assigned a product manager. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean this is the product manager that's best for that particular artist, and so on and so forth. But that's because of how many artists they have at the label, how many product managers they are. The projects go out randomly. Maybe someone says, hey, I want that one, but it doesn't mean it's the best person. So as a result, you end up buying, hiring someone independently because you have to.
But
you're paying for that service twice.
Yep.
Exactly. So.
Yeah. And then there's more even the most artist-friendly JV deals that are 50-50 net profit share deals. When you're working and you're taking that money, you have to understand that it's 100% loan. You have to pay back first.
Yep.
And then they take 50% of everything in the future. And so if you're going to do that, do it with someone you trust that you feel like is really going to be in it with you and not a company that has hundreds of artists.
Back, though. Then there's also another caveat that they have, which is they have money that they hold in reserve. So you don't actually get your 50-50 even after you pay it back. There's money they reserve. So it really comes back more like a 75-25 because there's money they always hold.
I mean, you're definitely the expert on this more than I am because you've lived more of these deals and we just look at the numbers.
Yeah.
But that's the case, right? And so when we thought, okay, well, if we can imagine a more fair alternative, what does it look like? And I've been thinking about this for about 2 years because I've been inspired by companies like Cabbage in the online space that fund small to medium-sized businesses by giving them like an advance against their revenues. So if you are a host on Airbnb and you make money through Airbnb, but you want to take a small business loan to be able to flip another house that you could rent or invest in renovation in your current house, it's hard for you to go to a traditional bank if you don't have good credit to be able to do that. But companies like Cabbage, for example, can read your revenue from your Airbnb account and give you that as an advance. And companies like Square and Shopify provide it to their customers. And so we thought, well, what could we partner with one of these to provide this for music? And in conversations with them, we realized that like music's just too weird for them and they don't really get it, which is fine. And so then we went on this journey to figure out how we do it our own. And it was very serendipitously that one of our STEM artists by the name of Dan Dilla reached out to us and said, hey, just so you guys know, I love what you're doing. I actually have spent the last couple of years working on the finance team at SpaceX and have a background in banking. And I just left to pursue being an artist full time, but I have all this free time and I still love finance and love what you guys are doing. If I can be helpful in any way, let me know.
Wow.
And so we started to get to know him, and he started doing some consulting work for us. And I invited him to join a call with me with a couple of these financiers that were interested in like these online alternative advanced businesses. And he joined the call with me. And it was after that call that he just like ran with it with me. He's like, oh, I get it. Here's ways we can model this. Here's how we could structure it. And we ended up partnering with a firm called CoVenture that specializes in these like special purpose financing vehicles, which is what this ultimately is called in like the finance world.
Yeah. Well, this is a game changer though.
Thank you. And they provided a vehicle. We're going to be advancing over $100 million to artists. If you're an artist or a producer or a songwriter that gets paid through STEM, you can go online through the Scale product and see exactly what amount you qualify for. And you determine on a sliding scale, which is why we called it Scale, what your terms are. So the less money you take, the more you contribute of your income to pay it down, the lower the cost of capital. And we show you exactly how much it's going to cost, and you can make those decisions yourself. And we think that that type of clarity should be a standard.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think
Thank you.
Artists need it so badly, you know, because obviously the biggest thing as an independent artist, the hardest thing to do is raise money to market yourself.
Totally.
You know, I know artists every day that are releasing music, but then it's like, okay, they're trying to, do all the social media tricks, but they have no money to drive anything.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, one thing about marketing is you still need money.
Totally. You can't market. I mean, listen, social media can only get you so far. And unfortunately, the social platforms, once they get big enough, make it more expensive for you to reach your own fans.
Yeah, exactly. I ask this to almost every guest. It's one of my staple questions. What advice would you give your 21-year-old self or 22-year-old self?
Oh, God. I was so arrogant as a 21-year-old. I mean, I was coming into a big talent agency as an agent when everyone my age was still in college or had just gotten to the mailroom. I think I could have been a better person, honestly. And I regret the arrogance I carried. And when we would meet with startup founders, I was so critical because I was not empathetic to their journey. Because you imagine entrepreneurship to be one thing, and the most dangerous thing to an entrepreneur is someone else's opinion or ideas.
Yeah.
And I was filled with ideas and opinions for other people.
But, you got to walk until you walk the journey. Yeah, you don't know, You
have no idea. And I think it's the same thing for any creative entrepreneur.
So a little more humility, a little more empathy.
Humility, empathy, and for the people around them, please, it's great to show enthusiasm, but make sure that when you're sharing ideas and criticism, the person on the receiving end is willing to, is in a place mentally and where they are ready to receive it, because otherwise it's going to derail them.
Yeah. That's really good advice.
Thank you.
What does success mean to you? What's your definition of success?
It's very personal for me. Like I said in the beginning, my parents told me that I could be a doctor or lawyer, and being a creator wasn't a sustainable option. And success to me is when there's a world in which a kid can tell their parents that they want to be a producer, a songwriter, an artist, or a creator. And the parents look at them and say, that's a great career, or that's a sustainable business. And I think we're so far away from that as a culture. But the reality is that there's more kids making money online by creating than ever before. And yet the stigma around it isn't gone yet.
Yeah. And I think tools that you're creating are going to help it be a little bit more sustainable, because right now, even though kids are creating more, it's still volatile.
Totally.
And I think just the stability of it, I think those kind of tools like STEM is going to create this stability where people can really be financial literate,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's so necessary.
Thank you.
The topic, it's a very popular topic these days. The Me Too movement, the feminist movement, this and that. In your journey as a female founder, how do you feel like you've been received? When you started meeting with investors, and you walk in, and not
Yeah.
only, you walk in, you want to just be another, founder of thing, but you're a woman and asking for money. Did you feel like you encountered any of that, just, negativity towards that or preconceived notions?
I've had a really complex reflection on this because when I was a young agent, I think one of the things that gave me leverage was that I could walk into any agent's office and get their attention because I was a young female and blonde and bubbly. And I leveraged that, right? I think that because I was put into such a crazy environment at such an early age, I learned how to hold my own and I learned how to establish my boundaries. So I became comfortable in incredibly masculine environments.
Okay.
And the good news was that when I went to UTA, there was a lot of female agents with power that I could look up to and I could say, oh, this is how you can present yourself and be competitive in this environment. And the good news about UTA compared to some other talent agencies I was at prior to that was that there are women who knew how to balance work and life. So I felt like I had good role models for that. So I don't feel like I faced any discrimination. I actually realized leaving UTA and going into being an entrepreneur and a leader of my own company, how desensitized I was to a lot of mansplaining or biases. And it took a lot for me to recognize that. And it was greatly influenced by the people I had around me who were a lot more woke, for a better way of saying it, than I was. When I was fundraising at the time, the first 2 rounds, I had 2 male co-founders. And one pattern I recognized, and I don't know if there's any validity to this or not, but I would do a lot of the meetings on my own because when you're fundraising, it's a numbers game. You need to pitch 50 to 100 investors to get 1 or 2 yeses because everyone says no, right?
Yep.
And it's a sales process. You can't take it personally. And I wasn't going to distract my whole team in doing that. So I took a lot of the first conversations myself. And for investors who became more interested, I would then bring in my co-founders. And one pattern I noticed was that the only investors who actually said yes and invested are the ones who witnessed me in the room with a co-founder that was a male. And so for a part of the time I would reflect and say, is it because I needed a man who was technical to give me validity to what I was doing? Or the other side of it could be, investors want to see co-founder dynamics, and that could be it, right? So I don't know if that's true or not, but it definitely has crossed my mind.
Okay. Now, you're a female boss and you're in a different role.
Yeah.
Now, when you're subordinates, you have to, have the tough conversations. Do you feel like you've developed a management style? Let me rephrase the question. From when you started the company, then you had to be the boss, to now, what did you feel like you had to learn in terms of dealing with staff?
Being a boss is hard. I made a ton of mistakes because I was not comfortable with leading. In reality, I deferred a lot of decisions. I tried to make things based on consensus, which is the absolute worst thing you could do early on in a business. And that ultimately led to there being multiple visions in a company early on that could have killed us.
Yeah.
And I was afraid to be affirmative. And I took for granted how people perceived me. I was almost afraid of my own shadow. And I'm still trying to get comfortable with this where people expect me to be a certain way. And I can't be that all the time. And it's a consistent struggle. And the thing that I have the benefit of, luckily, is a strong team around me that I've been vulnerable with, my executive team, who knows my strengths and weaknesses, who are not afraid to give me feedback.
And what do you think they expect you to be?
Present, empathetic, firm, and make clear decisions. And listen, you wake up every morning and there's 20 fires burning, but you have enough water to put out 2. and you go to bed and you have 18 fires that are still burning and you have 20 new ones that come up the next day.
Yeah.
It's an impossible feat to be clear-headed, make great decisions with imperfect information. Like, it's a shit ton of work.
Yeah.
And I'm human, and I think people recognize that. And so I try to be vulnerable, but it's hard because sometimes your staff doesn't want you to be vulnerable. They want to look at you and be like, you have your shit together. Meanwhile, like, I'm trying to present that all the time, but internally I'm like losing my mind.
Yeah. I asked that question too because same thing. I go in a room. I've got tattoos. I've been a music producer. And I'm meeting with these investors and these financial people, and it's the same thing. If I go in the room and I have Ike with me, which is Ike Youssef, which is Jimmy Iovine's former CFO, or go in the room. Obviously, would just receive better. And I know we make a stronger team. It's like the yin to the yang. But I would love to still go in the room by myself and not be looked at as the black guy, the black guy with the tattoos, the hip hop dude, whatever, Kanye, Dre, I'd love to go in there as just the founder of a startup. You know what I mean?
But you have to realize that it's amazing when you realize what your deficiencies are or what people perceive to be your gaps. And if you can find people around you that fill them and you can be a stronger team, then that's amazing. And I think that's where people talk about, like, it's team or everything, right? Investors don't just look at the founder and the vision. That's the beginning kernel, but then they look like, what is your ability to pull together a team that can fill the gaps and help you execute? Because it's impossible to do it all as one person.
Yeah. And I feel like that's the key to success, right? Meaning being able to, be true, honest with yourself about what your deficiencies are. I think some people, still have struggle with that. And I think that's the difference between success sometimes. Because if you can be honest with yourself, like talking. Apparently I have a deficiency in talking today.
You definitely don't.
I think, okay, you've launched Scale. What is the future for STEM? Like, meaning, obviously, we wish you the best with the success of this product. But one of the things I've liked about STEM and what you've done and just following your journey is the evolution of the product. The product just seems to get better and better. Yeah, you take a left turn sometimes and you have to make a right. But what is your goal for STEM in the future? Like, in terms of like the impact and like what is success for STEM now? Meaning, is it a certain number of users on the platform? What do you see that in the future for STEM?
Yeah. So we've thought about our business in phases, right? Because you can't solve all the problems at once. You have to like sequence them correctly. And there's a couple pieces in the middle that we're not sure what's going to come first, but I can walk you through the problems we want to solve. So the first problem was, how do we eliminate the friction of collaboration for independent artists, right? So they can monetize their music and have visibility into their finances and have everyone trust they're going to get paid.
Yeah, clarity.
We did that. So now they have a business, it's independent. How do they grow it? They need money. Let's give them access to money where they can set their own terms. Then it's going to be like, okay, well, now they have to spend their money, right? Well, how do they keep track of how they're spending the money? And how do we make it easier for people? Because again, if it's independent artists or labels, because we can advance to both. Mm-hmm. Any shareholder, could be a label manager, anyone can access the capital through Scale. If they're going to be investing it in someone else, they need to recoup it. So how do we build more financial tools around expense tracking, recruitment tracking, and then make it easier to pay people? Like, when I think about who we want to be when we grow up and what we want people to think of us with, it's about the easiest way to get paid if you're in music for anything.
Okay. And do you see strategic partnerships in the future? For instance, as part of the marketing tools and strategies for like artists, meaning if you've got a partnership with this person or that person in terms of exposure from touring to...
Totally. There's always a lot of value in data when it comes to marketing decisions. I think we need to stay really focused on financial data because I think that's where there's a huge opportunity. And so when I think about partnerships, like, I'd love for any of the major labels or any of the existing distributors to say, hey, you know what, let's integrate with STEM so that our clients can get the benefit of paying their collaborators faster or paying out other people, right? So when I think of partnerships, I think about, we don't have to just own the distribution side on the independent. In fact, I don't want to. There was literally no other way to get into the business for us, so we did it. But how do we make STEM ubiquitous so that we become the pipes and the easiest way for people to send and receive money in the business? Because when I think about the most complicated part of the music business, it's that the chasing money part of it sucks.
Everybody's always chasing money.
Always. And it's so
Or waiting on money.
inefficient. And it doesn't have to be today. And that's the thing.
Yeah, right? Everything's, Cash App, Zelle. Like,
yeah. And like when you look at all the other alternatives and other businesses or that's available to consumers, you're like, why hasn't anyone done this for music?
yeah. Who do you see as STEM's competitors? Because to me, you found like your own niche, kind of very unique sort of thing. Who do you see as your competitors?
So our competitive landscape's really complex because it falls into multiple areas, right? Because we do independent distribution, we compete with every distributor today. I don't want to compete with them in the future, but that's where we stand today. For online lending, we're competing with, I think we're still competing with the major labels and other distributors that offer advances, but then it also gets us into this bucket of like all their online businesses that we mentioned, like the Cabbages of the world who could potentially eventually realize music and get into the space.
Yeah. And there's new startups coming with where the same thing. You can invest in an artist you like and so forth.
Yeah, exactly.
So those are indirectly competitive.
There's tons of accounting softwares that exist that I'd love to compete with like in the future. So it's evolving. I think that our biggest competition is anything that's opaque.
Okay. So that's a good answer.
Thank you.
I know you gave your younger self, and this could be redundant, but now if you were just giving a young woman, young man who's, in college or didn't even, or whether they went to college, didn't go to college, but they're looking at coming into this music business, more and more I see I do a lot of lectures and random things. I see a lot more intuitive young people in terms of maybe the questions they asked 10 years ago to the questions they're asking now. What would you give advice to these particular young people that you almost see that they've got that spark where they don't want to go the traditional route and they want to start a company, or they may have even started a company? Some of these kids are really impressive. I met a 17-year-old who had a skateboard shop, and he's, been moving into a record label now and all kind of stuff. What are the advice and the tools that you would say for them to really work on, to really prepare themselves?
I think there's nothing better than going somewhere that you can get your skills polished really quickly. Like not just mentorship, but I'm blanking on the word. Apprenticeship, I think, is hypercritical for anything. If it wasn't for me being at a place like UTA that had a great training program with sophisticated executives I could learn from, that put me at the center of having access to so many different types of people, I don't think I could have ever done what I'm doing. So I know that some people are like, oh, I want to just go off and be an entrepreneur. But if you could like pause for a year or two and go somewhere big and get like the foundation of the frameworks or work at a company that is going through the startup process, just to experience it from like an arm's length distance, but embedded within it, like do it, because then you'll learn the mistakes. And then when it comes time for you to do yourself, like you're not going to repeat them, right? So if you don't have access to going to a big talent agency and you're in a small middle town, like, and you want to be an entrepreneur, go work at a small business. Yeah. Go see someone else trying to do this and try and ask as many questions. And the good news is that today you don't need to go to like Stanford to get an MBA. Some of the best Stanford classes are all on YouTube. Like Reid Smith teaches a class, Reid Hoffman, who's the founder of LinkedIn and a big VC, teaches a class called Blitzscaling. And in that class, he brings in entrepreneurs, everyone from like the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world to the guys who founded Reddit, and I mean, huge people. And they talk about like their journey of starting a company. It is one of the most amazing classes. I've learned more from that than I did in any other class in college.
Wow.
And it's all online for free. So go experience something, whether it's related to your business or not. If you want to be an entrepreneur, go work for an entrepreneur. Get as close to them as possible. Understand the questions and the challenges they're going through. And if there aren't people around you to answer them, there's great content on the internet that can help you connect the dots.
That's great advice. That's great advice. Wow. Anything you want to, just you need outside of Scale, which, by the way, if you don't know about Scale, it just got announced today. Please go check it out. Especially calling all artists, calling all producers, calling all songwriters. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was amazing.
You're amazing.
Every time I talk to you, I feel like I learn, 10 new things.
Can we do this again where I ask you the same questions?
Yeah, we can.
Great.
We can. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Trey.
Best of luck with everything.